uses excess wind energy in the middle of the winter, where it just switches on when power prices go very, very low or negative. Or you could have other waste sources of heat, so particularly around the data centres, around industrial plants and so on. A lot of European district heating, about 60 or 70% of it would be waste from power plants, incinerators and so on. So Dublin right now has a big incinerator, which will have a huge amount of waste heat. So we're talking about large amounts of district heating in Dublin, and there's a lot of pipes down the IFSC and so on already. So really, what district heating allows you to do is you put the infrastructure in, and it doesn't really matter what the heat source is, nobody notices any difference. And that's really the idea behind district heating. So really what it is, you have a central heating plant, you have hot water pipes underground, which go into each of the different buildings, and then in each building you'll have a small heat exchanger. So for a house it would be about that size, and for a building of this size it might be a quarter the size of the existing plant room. And it's literally a large heat exchanger and a heat meter in a building system. And you know, heat meters, while we don't normally have heat meters in Ireland, they're, you know, in a lot of parts of Europe they would be as common as electricity meters. And we would use a lot of heat meters. We have a lot of our local authority buildings.
What exactly does a small heat exchanger do?
What it does is it essentially separates the water from this building to the main water from the district heating plant. So if you have a leak in a radiator here, it's not the same water. That's really the main separation. It allows your district heating water to be separate from the water in the building. That's all it does. So it just acts like essentially like the small heat exchanger acts like a boiler would in any other plant. So why would you do it? So I suppose one of the big drivers for district heating in Ireland right now is it allows you to use a large biomass boiler plant. So if you want to use the likes of forestry residues or energy crops or whatever it is, much more efficient in large boilers than every building have on their own and their own delivery store and so on and so forth. So what you have, let's say in Tralee, they have a large biomass boiler and district heating to about 120 apartments and social houses, which allows you to use cheap fuel. It allows you to use renewable fuel. There is a large state support scheme about to be announced in the next couple of weeks on renewable heat. Without that state support scheme, this is not viable because fossil fuels are quite cheap. And essentially you will have more or less zero cost fuel with that sort of plant using the renewable supports. But I suppose one of the big things and the big driver, particularly in Denmark and Sweden and Scandinavia and Austria, has been about local jobs. So, you know, I suppose the big driver is you buy your fuel from the local community. So that money goes back to the local community and pays for, you know, harvesting, processing wood chip. You save a good bit of money, it's cheaper, but also whatever you do spend, it goes back into the locality, and that obviously creates local jobs. So like if you were to consider, if we were to do the 4 or 5 buildings in this, or I suppose main facilities around here, including the hospital, probably be supporting 10 to 15 jobs equivalent, you know, throughout the supply chain from the trees and energy crops right through to the boiler maintenance people and so on, versus exporting the money directly to the Middle East and to, you know, maybe having a quarter of a job for the fuel delivery guy locally. So, you know, it is about a local stimulus. Without this, does it really make sense? Probably not. You're doing it for that real reason, for local economic stability and so on, and obviously for the lower carbon fuel. It does allow you to use different heat sources, so disconnect the heat source from users, and allows you to do those sort of things that you can change. So as you've seen over the last 30 years in Ireland, we've gone from peat and coal to oil to LPG to natural gas, and each of those requires every building to make an investment to change the boiler. And once you put the district heating infrastructure in, you can do that, and you can change it with a fraction of the cost per building, and so on. So in terms of district heating in Ireland, just I suppose to look at what's available or what's in use, there's no large scale district heating in Ireland, and the Irish government policy on renewable heat is, I think we're 26th out of 28 European countries. We have no policy. First real policy support is going to be announced in the next, as I say, the next couple of weeks. We're really far behind, and about half our energy is used for heat. So we have a huge catch up to do. About 6% renewable heat in Ireland versus 60% in a lot of European countries. So what have you got? You've got Tralee. So I'm going to suggest if your people get behind this idea, go visit Tralee, look at the boiler plant, look at the house, talk to the customers, talk to both the large and small customers. Jordan have one, and they have a solar and biomass one. There's a couple of different public housing schemes between apartment blocks and Longford have done some retrofitted social housing estates with district heating. And as I said, there are a lot of the campuses, so UCD, UCC, Gertrude Agricultural College have their own 600 kilowatt district heating system, and they grow their own fuel for it. It supplies about 15% of European heat in district heating, so it's not new, it's just new here. And even, I think it's worth having a look at Tralee in terms of seeing what that sort of scale of 1 to 1.5 megawatts of, which would be about equivalent to what we see here, maybe even a little bit more.
Actually, the group have actually been down there for a
Oh, very good. Very good.
Yeah, we're done with that.
Okay, great. So you kind of get a feel for what that is. So in terms of, from my point of view, what I think the support requirements are in terms of trying to get something up. First of all, you need to have a supporters group, a stakeholder group, which must include the people who use a lot of heat. So the facilities managers of the big facilities around here must be central and core to that. And without them on board, without them kind of committed to not committed, but at least very interested, it's going to be very hard to make it work. You're going to need someone who is driving it, and a community leader, for want of a better word, someone to push it on. And when you do have the right group of people around it, the next thing to do is get a feasibility study done. And that feasibility study is, I suppose, it's a piece of engineering where you look at each of the heat loads. We've done one for Claremorris, Nina, Portlaoise. There's something done for Tralee, for Killarney. So there's a few of them done. There's some examples. You look at the design, where you're going to put it, where the pipeline lengths, what they're going to cost, what the fuel supply cost is, what are the different other challenges around it. And the other side of it is to look at the fuel source. And what you want to do in that is to look at how can you, for want of a better word, line up your 15-year or 20-year fuel supply. So so the farmers can know they've got a market for their product, so they can invest in energy crops if it's energy crops, so that everyone through the supply chain knows they've got a sustainable business.
Besides just, we say we have forestry open, right? When you were saying getting farmers to, would that be growing willow or something like
Could
that?
be, yeah, could be.
And is it being done, or to what degree has it taken off in this country?
It hasn't really. It can work well, but the problem is to make a local supply chain, you need demand, which is the consumers, and you need supply, and you need the two of them to grow in tandem. Because otherwise, what will happen is someone will put in a boiler and want to put fuel, and they get annoyed, they want to put heat, or the farmer will plant and want to market. So what happened in 2010, 11, 12 is the Department of Agriculture came out with supports from Miscanthus and Willow. Loads of farmers put it in. Department of Energy said we're going to do a renewable heat support. 2013. 2014 passed. 2015 passed. 2016 passed. 2017 will pass, and they're about to announce it. And it's taken them 5 years, so the supply got very annoyed because they have a market and they've all gone and ripped it out. So ultimately you need supply and demand to go, and that's why you need this long-term customers and suppliers at the same time to work together. So in Upper Austria, we had a lady over a couple of weeks ago there to do a talk, and she talked about there's about 322 local cooperative heat supply companies in Upper Austria, in the equivalent of Munster, 322 in the equivalent of Munster. And every small village has 8 or 10 farmers that their job is to supply this, and there's one local guy who will run the boiler, And that's the heat for the village, all local supply chains. Now, maybe a little bit more forestry, but again, there's quite a lot of forestry around here and especially further west. So, what you do is you spend somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 and you put 30 days, probably, or 40 days of an engineer doing the sums behind this, talking to the local supply chain with yourselves, mapping out where the pipes would go, where's the land, you know, working with everyone to decide what you're going to do. They put a plan together, and that plan will look at all the different things. And if that says it's not feasible there, you're not really wasted that much, you know. And you basically say, this is our aim, we'll get to that, and once you've got to that, you say, well, do we have something? And in the process of doing that, each of the different customers will have been engaged somewhat in terms of getting their bills together. You'll have looked at some of the local supply chain and whether there is realistically a supply chain of fuel. And then once you kind of decide where we're going to go on from that, you look at sort of the development stage where you're looking at planning permission, you're looking at long-term agreements. So you'd have to get like the HSE to sign up to a 10 or 15-year agreement that they would purchase heat off you, which can be challenging in terms of public
Places have, in any of the current schemes, like if you look at the one that we're looking at here, right, most of our major customers will be like government departments or, yeah. Have they bought in any of the existing ones at the moment?
There's lots of individual where they have individually bought into it, but not as a cooperative. And essentially, when you talk about what this stakeholder needs to be, it needs to essentially be, you set up a company that would be owned, let's just say the HSE facility here is going to buy 30% of the heat. They would buy and own 30% of the company. They would, and whoever, each time anyone becomes a customer, they also become an owner and a shareholder in the non-profit company. And what that essentially is it allows the governance of that company to be done by the people who ultimately are affected. Now, has that been done by a public body in Ireland to date to become a part of the cooperative? No. We almost got there in Nina, and then we hit 2008, 2009 financial crisis, and private sector people that would be cooperative members weren't able to finance it. Is this possible? I definitely think so. I've spoken to the HSE energy manager, I've spoken to other people in the department. There is an appetite for it, but nobody has brought them an agreement and said, here's sign up to it. So for example, Tralee has, they've done their own, but the local authority run it.
It'd be actually imperative that the HSC will sign up to the owner anyway, as long as they purchase, I suppose, the heat over a 10-15 year period.
Correct. And they could do an expression of interest.
To
they
support the whole project.
Yeah,
if they didn't want the whole ownership and the responsibility that goes potentially with that.
They should.
Yeah, I know, in order to have that swap model work properly.
Yeah, and essentially the development stage there is where you basically try and line up, getting everyone to sign up to the concept and to sign up to the required, because you won't be able to borrow money unless you have the agreement from the HSE to purchase the fuel, to purchase the heat, or from the 50 or 60%, you won't be able to get your development finance. Now there is quite a bit of money available for this type of development stuff, both at a local level or at I would say local, national and European level to fund that work. And like that is not a small amount of work to pull that project together, but you're talking about essentially having a developer team put together from the local community, no more than building this in the 90s. And that's really, that's the stages. So what I'd say is you need to get to the stage of having enough people that are bought into the concept. Then you need to, like, SEI will likes to see this type of thing as part of the master plan. So you do an energy master plan for the area, that would be your feasibility study, and they'll fund that to do that, which would be great. And at that point then, What you really need to do is get hearts and minds brought into it when you have a feasibility